So welcome on this third Tuesday of February to our second meeting for the year with our Southern Cross Alliance for Israel. It's been a busy couple of weeks, as you all know. There's been lots of things happening, and so I'm not going to go too long. I'm going to introduce our co-host tonight, Stephen Green, as the rabbi has been caught up with other family matters. Stephen, to unmute, say a few words, and then pass to Ian, who's going to introduce Alex, who I've seen has come on board.
Amazing. Good evening. Shalom, everybody. Thank you for your patience and thank you for your faith and thank you for hanging in there and sticking with us. Tremendous. In the rabbi's absence tonight, I wanted to share a message that living and being a Jewish Australian is trying at the moment. We're living through unprecedented times, and many in my community I know are feeling levels of anxiety and fear that we've never experienced before. Personally speaking, being in that synagogue, the rabbi's synagogue, on the Friday night Shabbat prayer service, and being told to go home and evacuate and get home quickly when there was the approaching Palestinian protests coming right outside our shul was something I never thought I'd ever experience, and the feelings and trauma, I guess, that went with that. Subsequently, having a number of friends that were named in the in that list of 600 with all their details leaked, you can imagine the fear, the invasion, and the violation that a lot of them felt. Having a son, my own son, about to start at university is, it should be filled with so much excitement and happiness and pride, but we're feeling really, really scared, and reading articles about expecting disruptions and pro-Palestinian protests coming into every lecture hall and allowed to give their the floor to the anti-Israel hate mongers, is what I'd term it. Is pretty harrowing. Watching the events unfold with the New South Wales police inquiry into the chants that were made on that Opera House foreshore on the 9th of October, when the findings were handed down by expert forensic and audiologists to say, well, all they said were, "Where's the Jews?" So, as if that's okay. Is a bitter pill to have to swallow. And just last week, watching my own Melbourne City Council have a vote on whether Israel needs to do an immediate ceasefire was quite extraordinary and mind-boggling. But even more so was when the two Jewish protesters, or the two Jewish attendees, asked for directions of how to get in. The police pointed to where they should go in, and the police, without even thinking, we should escort these people to the front door, let them go. And those that are following the news will have seen what happened. It was the two Jewish community members that were escorted out and apprehended for disturbing the peace, because quite frankly, it was easier for the police to take the path of least resistance and deal with the two Jewish members rather than dealing with the intimidating mob of Israel haters. However, what's my message tonight? The rabbi would always encourage me to look for and find the positive message, and in amongst all of this, I do have some amazing takeaways that the Jewish community does feel enormously blessed to have many Christian friends, friends from outside the community standing with us, showing that you are absolute righteous among the nations, and friends standing with Israel and standing with the Jewish people. Tonight we've got one of those very shining lights appearing, which is Mark Leach, and we can't wait to hear from Mark. We know that so many of the ministries in Australia that I'm blessed to be connected with are doing incredible advocacy work through prayer, through charity, through deeds, and through putting together solidarity missions. So thank you so much to ICEJ, to C4I, Christians for Israel, to the Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, and there are many more, and many individuals that have contacted my office to book travel to get to Israel, to stand with Israel, to serve, to pray, to be there. And that's just unbelievable for me and for the entire community. My good friend, who I think is on the call, Bishop Ian Palmer, wrote to the Melbourne Anglican to educate them as we're on the brink of the Jewish festival of Purim. And Ian very cleverly explained to them that the book of Esther, which is currently anecdotally being studied by City on a Hill and some other Anglican congregations, we know in chapter 3, we encounter this villain called Haman, who was actually the first ever anti-Semite recorded. A powerful man, he'd somehow climbed the slippery pole of Persian power. He reached the top, and he now demanded that people worship him. However, Mordecai, the Jew, and who was Esther's cousin, refused to bow down to him. For Mordecai would only worship the Lord, our God, never bow to another human being. And as Haman got infuriated, he plotted revenge, not just for Mordecai, but on all the Jewish people, the Jews, in chapter 3, verse 6. And so anti-Semitism began. Though the actual word wasn't coined until the 19th century, 2,500 years ago. What is the definition of anti-Semitism? According to Ian, Haman nailed it when he said to the king, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples who are different from others." And so we learn anti-Semitism is fundamentally the hatred of difference. Tonight, I know Alex will share with us because he deals with that day in, day out. And we're grateful to have him join with us tonight as well. Ian Palmer, in his wisdom, continued on that letter to his community and to the Anglican media, the Melbourne Anglican, to say anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish problem. Jews cannot fight anti-Semitism alone. The hated cannot cure the hate. Jews are not the anti-Semites. It's our problem, the church's problem, our society's problem. What can we do? From our perspective, stand with your Jewish friends as you have been. Let them know you're with them. Give them a hug. Tell them you're there. Tread gently. Jewish people at the moment are not okay. It is only with your love, with your support and friendship and advocacy that we'll overcome this and get through to survive and thrive in the next 3,000 years plus as we have today. So that's it from me with some words in place of the rabbi. John, I think it's back to you.
Thanks, Stephen. Yes, and we'll pass to one of our other committee Board of Advice members, Ian Warby from Christians for Israel, to introduce our first guest, Alex Ryvchin, who's a long-time friend and been on a couple of times before. Over to you, Ian.
Thank you very much, John. Sorry if my video is not working too good, but hopefully you can hear me. It's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's guest, Alex Ryvchin, who serves at the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, is a lawyer, has a long history of studying law, is an author, including his debut book, The Anti-Israel Agenda Inside the Political War on the Jewish State. Also, he published a second book, Zionism, The Concise History, and more recently, his book, The 7 Deadly Myths of Anti-Semitism, From the Time of Christ to Cain West. He published that in 2023. He's a regular contributor to lots of newspapers and magazines, including the Australian Sydney Morning Herald, The Guardian, National Post, the Jerusalem Post, The Spectator, and even Christians for Israel's newspaper, Israel and Christians Today. We're really pleased to welcome our good friend, Alex. Welcome on board tonight, Alex. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Ian. Thank you for the invitation to speak and for that lovely introduction. I want to thank John for his leadership, Stephen for his excellent remarks preceding mine, and Reverend Mark Leach, my friend and ally who led the event in Sydney just a couple of Sundays ago so impeccably well. And I want to thank each of you, our brothers and sisters in faith who have stood with us in our darkest hour. It's something we will never ever forget. I want to first talk about this war, this just and necessary war. The Jewish people know well what it means to live both without a means of defense and to live with it. And the difference literally is life and death. Our biblical tradition tells us of the exodus from Egypt, of our forebears, which was achieved by the diplomacy and the civilian leadership of Moses. But Jewish statehood, our settlement in our promised land, was achieved after the death of Moses, under a new leader, a soldier, Joshua. There was a time for a civil leader, and there was a time for a military one. For nearly 2,000 years after our expulsion from that land, the Jews lived as a distinct, easily recognizable, vulnerable minority in the countries of others, with no national center of our own. Our prophets commanded us to seek civil participation, to integrate, to devote ourselves to the good of the societies in which we lived, even if we were treated poorly. Jeremiah wrote, "Seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare." The great American writer Mark Twain observed the good citizenry of the Jews. He wrote, "The Jew is not a disturber of the peace of any country. Even his enemies will concede that. He's not a loafer, he's not noisy, he's not a brawler, nor a rioter, he's not quarrelsome." But as we learn throughout our history, our welfare could not be assured merely through prayer or contribution to society. It also requires organized defense, something the Jews did not have from the year 135 CE, when they rebelled against Roman rule, until 1915, when a British officer, John Henry Patterson, formed a legion of Jewish volunteers known as the Zion Mule Corps, which saw action alongside our boys in Gallipoli. In the eternal words of King Solomon, there is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Today, we are still bewildered that a pogrom of such scale and ferocity could be carried out in the Jewish state, which was reconstituted so that the horrors of killing squads and pogroms would never be repeated. We are bewildered by the silence of many friends, the wicked denials of our enemies, the pleasure they take in our suffering. We are still in mourning for the crimes committed by men who came in military fatigues, brandishing weapons of war, who had received combat training by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, but were deployed not to defend, not to preserve life and way of life, but to fire RPGs at civilian vehicles from point-blank range, to prowl through agricultural villages, to torture and mutilate children found asleep in their pajamas, to rape women and young girls in a corpse-strewn field, to drag civilians off to a medieval captivity, and to parade stolen children and old women through the streets for the relish of the people in whose name they act. There is a time to love and a time to hate. There is a time for war and a time for peace. Today, the Jewish community feels love for our aching brethren in Israel. We feel love for our fellow Australians and for all humanity. But we also feel hatred now. Hatred for the rapists and torturers whose crimes we will never forget and we will never forgive. Hatred for those who forced the people of Israel to send their best and brightest into tunnels and booby-trapped alleys in pursuit of 135 hostages, and an enemy that happily yields up its own people as propaganda to feed the anger and prejudice of the gullible and the wicked. And so today is a time for war, a just and necessary war against evil manifest, a generational evil that cannot be reasoned with or placated, an evil that must be destroyed. This is a war in which 239 soldiers have so far fallen. Heroes, everyone, brothers, sons, and fathers who fell in the full service of their nation. May their memories bless and strengthen us. And when that war is won, it will again be a time to plant and harvest, a time to love, and a time for peace. But long after that war is won, we will still be fighting a war here. The hatred of the Jews is at its highest level since the Holocaust. A few months ago, just before October 7, my new book on anti-Semitism called The 7 Deadly Myths was published. It looks at the conspiracy theories that have hounded our people for millennia. Global domination, blood libel, obsession with money, dual loyalties, and so on. Today, I need only look at the replies to any of my social media posts to see every one of these myths vividly displayed. Every day I speak to mothers in my community who urge their children to remove their Star of David necklaces. I speak to artists subjected to blacklist, authors whose manuscripts had been accepted by a publisher and then mysteriously returned, doctors and lawyers having to defend malicious complaints made to their professional bodies. Today, I spoke at the Emmanuel School in Sydney. The enthusiasm and the alertness of the kids filled me with great optimism. At the end of the formalities, I was taken aside by a girl who aspires to be an actress, who is finding she's no longer welcome in the theaters where she performed and attended classes. I spoke to another girl who dreads being asked what school she goes to and has taken to answering that she attends the local public school as a way of masking her Jewishness. What is happening in our society? Anti-Semitism, as we know, is not an attack on the Jews. It is an attack on the Almighty. It is an attack on our Bible. It is an attack on our civilization, on our values. My rabbi often quotes the great sages who answer the question, where is God, with the words, wherever you let him in. Where is anti-Semitism, I ask? Wherever God has been forced out. The Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, the Australian Greens. How do we emerge from these dark times? The answer is together, only together, arm in arm, Jew and Christian, as we were in Sydney a few Sundays ago, a day we will never forget. For all my despair, I know the history of my people, and I know that we will always prevail, we will always overcome, and we will always outlive our tormentors. And so it will be again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. As always, wonderful. And as you say, we stand together in these times. It's amazing how this war has brought us closer and closer together. And it's been a privilege of ours to stand with you and many of the others and to keep in contact with you and to support you and to pray for you.
Thank you. It means a lot. Thank you.
It's great to see. I didn't really welcome people. We got welcome people from New Zealand. I see Morris is there, Morris Klein, who runs his weekly radio program. And I can see England there, New Zealand there, many parts of Australia. So welcome to all of you officially tonight. Once again, wonderful to see your support. So we will continue to go on and support. And next month and the month after, we have some fascinating speakers coming up to share some of the stories. And just for those who are interested, I've been running a Sunday afternoon group for those who are interested with people on the ground in Israel. And last week we had Major Hadar Shohet, who was in charge, a young girl, 33 years of age, in charge of one of the missile sites. And we also had Major Daniel Jacob, who's in charge of 550 paratroopers who move in and out of Gaza and up and down the coast to the north, to the south. And they're a mixture of old and young people who tell it as it is, as they find it, and all the emotional stuff they have to go through as well. Happy to share those links with you if you would like them. I'll put them in the chat and you can go to the Vimeo and have a look at them. But I think, have we got our guest with us, Sarah? Has Mark,
I haven't seen Mark just yet. I know he was scooting in after a Alpha course he's doing at his church. So he said we'll be jumping on straight on at 8:30. So we've got a minute or so, but if you do see him, I'm scrolling through the list to see as soon as he arrives, he can make himself known. But yes, I wondered if a few were there at the rally in Sydney, and if you're looking forward to the Never Again is now coming to a city near you. That might be an opportunity for a few of us to wave a hand or get a little bit interactive here if you went to one of those beautiful solidarity rallies in our nation. So,
who was there in
Mark,
Sydney? Oh, there's a few. Fantastic.
You there? Yeah, I can see a few faces that were there.
Yeah,
Many travelled. It was wonderful. Yes, and Mark you'll hear more about Mark as well as he'll join us shortly and hear a little bit more about him and his life, which will be fascinating. So yes,
yeah, and
wonderful days ahead. Historical for our nation, isn't it?
It is, and you can put in for those in Adelaide, March the 4th. There will
That's
be
right. Yes,
another Never Again is Now rally that is happening in Adelaide, and our good friends are in charge of that. So if you're in Adelaide or around Adelaide or want to know more details, please just send us an email, or indeed I'm quite sure Mark will put in his details, or the Never Again is Now website. And we are talking currently with Mark and the organising team about a Melbourne event and a Brisbane event. And our good friends in Perth, Kelvin Crombie he's got the venue. Margaret Court's Church is happy to do host a Never Again is Now in Perth. And so we're working towards throughout the capitals. And I think
perhaps I might suggest, if it's okay, John, if people are interested in being involved in a team that would like to be part of the Melbourne or Brisbane events, they could just pop their details in the chat and we could get in touch with you if you'd like to be a little bit more involved. It could be anything from sending out some letters or making some phone calls or simply being there on the day handing out water bottles. So something like that would be amazing. So maybe just encourage people on the chat to drop your name and details and just let me know which city you'd like to help out in, Melbourne or Brisbane, for example, or Perth if you're joining us from Perth. I can quickly gather those before the end of this call, and we can send them on to the team if you're interested to be helping out. It's a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, that'll be great. Thank you. I'm just popping into the chat the Vimeo of those two young people we had recently. If you want to go and spend some time having a look at, I'm always fascinated with the overview of the political through to the overview of the experts through to the overview of those who are actually on the ground. And I listen to those that are on the ground very much indeed as to what is taking place. So happy for you to have a look at that and have a listen to it. Just while we're talking and still waiting, I think we're nearly there. Where have we got him?
Mark's just coming in now.
Mark's coming in now. So we might pass to Sarah now to introduce Mark, and then we can get into some of the questions afterwards. And
if I can slip in also, there's another wonderful conference in Brisbane, the Church and State Conference. You might be able to flick up a little link on that. That's going to be another wonderful conference happening in Brisbane. So Ian, I'll leave you to throw that in the chat for us as well. So look, it is my honour. I think there you are, Mark. Wonderful to see you slipping straight in. It really is my honour to introduce our next guest, Reverend Mark Leach. Well, it's an incredible, inspiring man. I had the pleasure of finally meeting you in Sydney. But as an ordained Anglican minister, he's spent nearly 20 years leading and teaching and serving, and I'd say inspiring the Anglican Church, and currently leading the Darling Street Anglican Church in Sydney for the last 8 years. But our guest tonight, his journey began, and he's born in a small village in Zambia. So the journey began in Africa, and he spent most of his early years in Zimbabwe. And yes, I hope he may even embellish some of his stories of sparkling diamonds. But I'll leave that up to you to share with this wonderful, trustworthy group, Mark, and a story or two which shaped you into who you are today. You're fearless, and I love your tenacity for life, and also, your wonderful family. Mark's, after Africa and growing up in Zimbabwe, he headed off to theological college after he realised that becoming a doctor and a medical student wasn't for him. So I can fully understand that personally, Mark. And also, most importantly, he's been married for 30 years to his dear wife, Margot, and they've got 2 beautiful children in their early 20s, Oliver and Freya. And I think a wonderful activist family. You'll see Freya on Sky News and other places. So what a wonderful legacy you're growing in your family, and it's such an inspiration to us. And look, I just wanted to make mention, as I was digging through a few things for you, Mark, that he has actually acquired a master's degree in organizational dynamics. And that really came into full swing last Sunday. I think you really organized some incredible things, and those dynamics were in full swing last Sunday. So yes, thank you for that. But Never Again Is Now is really what you're known for, but I do hope you can share a little bit about your story, bringing us up to this time that made you pull out that flag from the back of your squash bag in that moment, and that really began that grassroots movement. And that first time I met you with our ambassador in Canberra was very special. So I will hand it over to you, but we just want to say thank you and congratulations for really kickstarting this grassroots movement that's began behind many wonderful Christian organisations that have come alongside and supported this. And up to 12,000 in Sydney, remarkable. And it is a pleasure to have you join us this evening. And so, thank you for making Mark feel welcome. Over to you, Mark. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. It's just a delight to be here. And I guess I wanted to start by honoring John and Ian and Sarah and all those in the kind of Christian Zionist movement who've loved Israel for so long and served so well, SCAFI, and I don't even know, there's a whole world there that I'm only just getting to become aware of, who've laid the foundations for everything that's happened and have been so steadfast in your love of Israel and your service of the body of Messiah, and also God's chosen people according to the flesh. So thank you, and I want to honor you right at the start. I don't take that for granted at all. My journey started in a little village in Africa. My mother was a German Jew. Her family, she and her parents fled Frankfurt in 1938. My grandfather was a doctor in practice with a Gentile, highly assimilated German Jew. He had fought for the Germans in the First World War, was decorated for his bravery, and he just a thought, he just thought it had never happened to him, and it never happened to them, that they were Germans. And so as through the 1930s, as the persecution ramped up, my grandmother saw it coming. Her best and closest friend was an academic, a woman who was a brilliant academic at the University of Freiburg. And in 1933, she lost her job along with all the other Jewish academics. And this is another whole story, but the Pope actually employed her at the Vatican. She was an archaeologist and a world leader in her field. And so the Pope gave her a job, and she then the Vatican then actually hid her through the war and spared her life, and she went on to have an extremely distinguished career. There's a German journalist writing a book about her at the moment. But through that experience, my grandmother and this friend dialogued, and we've got the letters that they exchanged with each other through the 30s, talking about the rising persecution. And my grandmother saw it coming. My grandfather just said, "No, it'll never happen to us. I'm part of the Frankfurt establishment," etc. And anyway, it did. And they got out just before Kristallnacht in 1938 and ended up in a tiny village in Swaziland, now Eswatini. as refugees, speaking no English. And my grandfather, they wouldn't recognize his qualifications as a doctor, so he ended up working as a dispenser. Then the governor of Swaziland had some chronic medical illness. The local doctors couldn't diagnose it. They asked for my grandfather's opinion. He was able to successfully diagnose and then operate on the governor, after which point they changed their opinion of him. And even though his English wasn't great, they recognized his qualifications. And he moved into medical research and ended up being decorated by the British. So he got an OBE for his work pioneering malaria control throughout southern and Central Africa, which is a way of saying that's how my mother ended up. She became a doctor as well. So secular German Jews doing what many Jews have done around the world through history, which is just survive and thrive in the face of enormous adversity. They moved up eventually. My grandparents and my mum were living up in what was then Salisbury in Rhodesia. She married my father, who was a South African of a Catholic background. My dad was spectacularly poorly suited to the task of being a husband and being a father. He was a mercenary. He smuggled emeralds and diamonds and engaged in all kinds of dubious activities, shall we say. My first visit to Israel was when I was 4 years old, and Dad had a package of diamonds that he was smuggling out of Africa, met a guy in Tel Aviv, and then was going to take them back to Antwerp to be cut and resold and so on. And so that was my first trip to Israel. Was not exactly a religious trip, and unless you assume that worshipping money is a religion, which I guess it is. So I grew up in that context with my father being less than helpful, but Catholic. So Mum would take us to Catholic church, and then the marriage ended. Dad left, and we'd also then go to my cousins' Shabbos dinners and bar mitzvahs and holidays and so on. But they were South African, secular German background, South African Jews, so not terribly religious. But that was my background, always aware of the two. So, in a different context, I would make the joke that I grew up with, Jewish and Catholic guilt. Some of you are giggling, you get it. But always with the shadow of the Shoah hanging over me. I mean, there was this deep sense of trauma, of always having to leave. The reason I went into medicine when I finished school was my grandfather saying to me, well, Mark, as a doctor, you can always provide for your family, no matter where you have to run to, you'll be able to provide. So, but along the way, I had a powerful encounter with God at the end of first year medical school. I was working up in a refugee camp on the border of Mozambique. And as an 18-year-old, I had this little 2-year-old baby dying in my arms. She'd pulled a pot of boiling water over her from the fire and was dying. So, and God used that to just say to me, hey, Mark, I thought it, my life can't be just about status and security, which were the two key drivers in my family of origin, the status, my son, the doctor, it was very significant that we're all doctors. And but then also the security that you could provide for your family if you had to flee. And so I just thought to myself, well, life's not about that. It can't be about that. When you encounter the kind of extraordinary suffering that I was encountering in the bush in Africa. So that started me on a journey. And 2 years later, I left medical school. I decided that God was calling me to be a physician of the soul. So to the chagrin of my family, who they ran my Jewish cousins ran a very large business in South Africa. So the chagrin that I left medicine. And then the second problem was that I didn't join the family business, but they were delighted. Everyone was delighted that I'd found something meaningful to do with my life. They didn't understand it, but I never experienced from my Jewish family any persecution or misunderstanding. My father, on the other hand, was in jail when I was a teenager, and he used to call me, my born-again Christian mother effer, only he wouldn't modify it. So there was a lot of misunderstanding from him and that side of the family. But God, I just always thought, if God is who he said he is, and if the scriptures are true, and Jesus is Israel's Messiah and the hope of the world, then I really should do my utmost to take him very seriously and try and take very seriously living the way he says we should live. So that was really just what I set out to do. And that led me to Sydney quite miraculously to study at Moore College, in the Anglican College. I got ordained as an Anglican, married an Australian. And I spent 30 years pastoring churches as a Jew. I just describe myself as I'm just a Jew following another Jew, helping a bunch of Gentiles realize that they'll find life if they follow a Jew. You know, sometimes I say my Jew's not that popular in some circles, but that's what it is. My Jewish identity, I say is very significant for me. It always has been. And sometimes that's uncomfortable. Sometimes, you know, anyway, that's just what it is. There is an underbelly of anti-Semitism in the church. You guys all know that. It doesn't take much for it to be activated and pop up in all kinds of circles, often not conscious, just unconscious. And I and my kids have encountered that. I've encountered that, just casual conversations from church people about how good they expect me to be with money and various things like that. And you go, oh, it's just such a classic anti-Semitic trope. Why are you doing that? Anyway, that's a bit about me. So that's I have many more stories of how God has provided miraculously through my life. And so I just love testifying to that and saying, there's a God who loves us and provides for us and guides us. And I guess the latest bit of that testimony is what's happened to me since October the 9th. Now, October the 7th obviously changed my life, but October the 9th has changed my life in ways that were completely unexpected. So on the 9th, I went down to, there was a pro-Palestinian protest planned at the, starting at Town Hall in Sydney, right on the steps of the cathedral down there in the Anglican Cathedral. And I knew this sort of, the other thing I forgot to mention, my brother converted to Islam. So I had a Jewish mother, a Catholic father, and a Muslim brother, and I'm an Anglican. So go figure. It's lots of interesting conversations with my therapist about that. I can tell you those another time. But walking into sectionality of the Abrahamic faiths and a lived experience of all of that. So I understand Islam very deeply and personally. And so I knew with a sort of chance they'd be crying. And I thought, this is just appalling. You know, the blood hasn't dried on the south of Israel. The terrorists are still running around the south. The IDF has not gone into Gaza. I knew they would. I knew that standing up for Israel would only get harder and harder and harder as the war started. But I thought, you know, Israel hasn't even retaliated yet. And they're calling for the ethnic cleansing of Israel. F the Jews, kill the Jews. So I went down, I took an Israeli flag out of my squash bag and I waved it, and I got chased out of the cathedral, guy running after me, threatening to slit my throat. I ran around the streets of Sydney, hid behind a police van, and then the cops dispersed the guys who were looking for me. And I did it because I thought, here in Australia, we have to stand up against this stuff. I'd seen what it did to my family, that the German Christians and everyday German citizens did not stand up. They just slowly let it increase and increase and increase. And everyone thought to themselves, well, it's not that bad. They're not coming for me. I mean, that's what my grandfather thought. And, you know, the pastors just got their churches to sing louder. Now, obviously, there were stellar examples of amazing Christians in Germany and Europe who stood up against the persecution. But so much of German civil society didn't. And I just thought, you know what? We cannot allow this to happen here in Australia. The Jews, I was told by the police not to come into town that day. The Jews were warned to stay out of Sydney. So I just thought, no, blow that. I'm going to go and I'm going to exercise my freedom of speech and assembly, and I'm going to launch a little one-person protest. And it wasn't because, I mean, people have said to me, well, you're really brave, you're really provocative, or you're Islamophobic. And I'm none of those things. I'm just a Jew following another Jew who goes, I'm not going to let this take root in our society. And it just takes ordinary people to stand up. It's not, you don't have to be a hero, because the majority of Australians do not want this kind of behavior in our country. And we just need to find a way to give them a voice and the courage to stand up and speak up. So that started my journey. And I didn't know what had come of it, but all the media picked it up. And then God took me and planted me in the heart of Sydney's Jewish community and has opened up this ministry to just say to Jewish people, you're not alone. We're here with you. Help them understand the nature of Islam that they're facing and the nature of the radical left and this unholy alliance we see between the two. And to say to, and so speaking and just connecting with the Jewish community. Then out of that, we knew, I met with my friend Wayne Zwar, who some of you have seen on here. Wayne and Michelle have been friends for 25 years. And on after the weekend after the October the 9th, they came to our church and we sat after church and we cried and we thought, we've got to do something. And then through another amazing set of connections and a wonderful lady, Jane O'Neill, who I'm not sure if she's on this call, but many of you would know Jane, who has had years of serving the Jewish community. Jane connected with the president of the great synagogue, a fellow called David Lewis. Now, David had been in London at the time that Tim and Haley's pastors in London set up an organization called Christian Action Against Anti-Semitism, and they ran a vigil in central London that brought Christians and Jews together. And David Lewis, the president of the great synagogue here in Sydney, was at that, and it was a transformative experience for him to see Christians standing with Jews, owning the anti-Semitism of the church and saying, we're with you. So David went to them and said, we've got to do this in Sydney. Tim and Haley reached out through a whole bunch of people, ended up with Jane. Jane reached out to me. I reached out to Wayne. And then Jane and Wayne and myself and David sat around before Christmas and said, okay, we've got to do this in Sydney. And fast forward, 6 weeks, and we ended up with 12,000 people in the domain, and an extraordinary experience of unity and of love and of Australians standing together and saying, we won't accept this in our country. So I feel like I've been thrust into this. It's not a role. I was quite happy pottering around in Roselle, reading books, talking to people, doing my thing as a local pastor, just loving people, just getting on with life. And suddenly it's like everything, and I think this is what God does, doesn't he? It's like everything that in my crazy past, and my background is a little unusual, but all of that seemed to have equipped me for such a time as this. And so I said, okay, Lord, let's go. And the best feedback I've got, and I'll probably start crying in a moment because it still moves. It's unbelievably moving. I had a call from one of my new best friends who's a Yossi. As my wife keeps joking, she says, Mark, they're all either Yossi or Avi. Like, which Yossi is this again? Which Avi is this again? So this was Yossi, a new bit. And Yossi phoned me. He leads one of the community organizations here. And on Sunday night, and he said, Mark, I just want to explain to you what it was like for the community on Sunday. He said, it's like on Sunday afternoon, you reached out and you gave a hug to 10,000 people. And for the first time in months or even years, we felt loved in Sydney. And I I just think, wow, isn't that's the heart of life, right? That's what we're put on this planet to do, to love others. So it was incredibly moving. So that's been the journey to now. And we're planning, there's an event, Never Again is now event on Sunday in Adelaide. I'm not going to it, but my daughter Freya is. We sort of tag team. She's an amazing young woman. You can see her on Sky and all kinds of other media places, and advocating and loving Israel deeply. And then I'm down in Melbourne on tomorrow to Friday to start mobilizing a crew there to put on a big event in Melbourne. So my hope and prayer is that we'll get 15 or 20,000 out in Melbourne, because we've shown that it works. We had we had Scott Morrison, John Anderson, Warren Mundine, Michelle Pearce from the ACL, the Dean of the Anglican Cathedral, like a whole range of speakers, Julian Lisa. So great range of speakers. And we've shown that and what Warren Mundine said to me, he said, Mark, what you've done is very significant, because you've You've given everyday people a voice and an opportunity to say what they couldn't say in the current environment, you know, sort of in the social media and in the sort of contemporary media, to say, no, we stand with Jewish people. We won't tolerate hatred in our country. So I hope and pray Melbourne will, I'm hoping we'll mobilize even more followers of Jesus from around Victoria and the Jewish community, and we'll send a message to our politicians and our church leaders and our community leaders that the broad mass of Australians do not want this kind of hate. Yeah, so that's it. There were some miracles on the way. Financially, things were, you know, not always secured. We launched into this without any money. We just said, okay, God, you're the God who provides, so do your thing and provide. And 10 days out, the provision wasn't, it wasn't apparent where this was going to come from, but it did. And a guy from South Australia, who I'm not sure he's ever given to Israel or a Zionist cause in his life, sent us a check for $25,000, and that paid for the staging. And then we just had this wave of money come in through our booking system and other donations. And then we had Ian and Christians for Israel made available their tax-deductible account, and suddenly it all just fell into place. But like, it was 10 days before the thing. So God came through. So that was great. So now I've got to trust him to do it again. That's my shtick. I don't know where God's going to take this. And I'd love to say we'll do one more event and then there'll be no more anti-Semitism in Australia, and the Jews will always be safe and loved and cared for here and around the world. My hunch is that's not the case. So my hunch is we've got some dark days ahead of us, but you know, we walk in the light, so it'll be all right. That's it. And if you want to get involved, go to our website, neveragainisnow.com.au. Get your pastors out, get your friends out, you know, and get just everyone, your folk who aren't yet Christians and who hate religion, your Hindu friends, your Iranian friends, your Assyrian friends, and let's get out onto the streets and say no to hate. There we go. And I saw a pitch there for Church and State in Brisbane. I'm also speaking at that. So if you want to come, if you're up in the Brisbane area and want to come and shake my hand or give me a lot of money, you know, I'll be there. I'll be there.
Thank you, Mark. You know, amazing story. And I think in the next week or two, we'll get some time together to share some of our stories, similar stories of the journey that we've all been on, and how Hashem has just brought us all together for this time. So I'm very thankful to have you on, to see the testimony, and to say to you on behalf of SCAFI and all our you know, all our members, or I don't call them members, they're just partners or friends or whatever, that we're all standing with you for the Never Again Is Now. And Stephen Green and the Rabbi and you and I are going to catch up about how we can support you in Melbourne. We've also got a lot of friends in Perth and Adelaide and other areas. So we're working together with them to support you and to mobilise the Christians to stand together. So I'm just so thankful that you were with us tonight. I've just got a few minutes left, and I noticed that one of our good friends in Israel, Stan Goodenough, is on the call. And Stan's coming out, and he's been a wonderful protagonist for Israel here and many other places of the world. And Stan, I'm just going to ask you to unmute and say hello and tell us the dates you're coming, and you've got a question that you want to share. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, Stan.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good.
Hi, Mark and everyone. Thank you, John. I texted you, John, just a minute ago because I have this brooding question, but I'll get there quickly in just a moment. My anticipation is to come to Australia about a month from now. It's contingent on me being granted a visa, and I've had some difficulty getting visas to visit you in the past. So if the Ministry of Interior blesses me with a visa, I should be down under, God willing, about a month from now, and I should be in Australia for about 4 weeks. Joy Halen is helping set up some meetings there. I appreciate prayer for the visa, if that's indeed God's purpose for me. My question, which Mark kind of, it's pegged on a statement you made right at the end of your presentation a moment ago, your anticipation of dark days ahead. The question is this: as we take a stand against anti-Semitism in every way, shape, or form, as publicly and loudly and unequivocally as we can in our nations, my mind is thrown back to the period that your forebears experienced in Germany, when there was an awareness that dark days were coming. And sadly, the church was largely silent, and there was no real public outcry against the growing threat of Nazism. But there was an awareness that this was a darkness that was on the way. Some emissaries from what was then still called Palestine came out to Germany and encouraged Jews, or tried to encourage Jews, to leave, to go home, back to the land of Israel, where they would be safe. And as in the case of your family, there were some who really believed there was a danger, and others who dismissed the danger. I believe, as a Bible believer, that the anti-Semitism that's ignited around the world so shockingly since October the 7th is a very loud warning call to Jewish people who have enjoyed the benefits and the hosting and the safety, security of living in countries like the United States, like Australia, have grown up in those communities, in those countries, and have contributed to them so incredibly, and now suddenly find themselves in danger and threatened at every level, even to the point of some of the examples that you gave, Mark. As Bible believers, I think we recognize, I certainly see it from both the word and what I see happening around me, that darkness is coming to our nations. For the Jewish people, the hatred of God's people is growing massively. And biblically, their safe haven is the land of Israel. How do we position ourselves in standing shoulder to shoulder with the Jews in our countries, or between them, as you did, Mark, and the haters, and going out en masse onto the streets with Never Again Is Now rallies, doing that, and at the same time believing that things are not going to actually get better in this instance? How do we speak to the Jews in our communities, in our countries? How do we encourage them to go home? Should we encourage them to go home to Israel? Should we? That's my question. And it's a heavy one on my shoulders. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, that's Stan, and we hopefully will have you as a guest on board next month, before you get here or as you get here, etc. But just a quick few words, Mark, in your reply to that. I certainly haven't got the answer, but you might have some insights I haven't got.
Oh, yeah, in 30 seconds, I'll give you the answer that will solve all your problems. Yeah, I think we've got dark days. I'm temperamentally an optimist. I think God's still God, and I think that the light overcomes darkness. I also don't share a pessimistic eschatological view. So there's a theological conviction there that I have. I worry about Israel. I was having a conversation with the Jewish person today, Jewish community leader. The big problem with October 7 is it's shown that Israel is not the invulnerable place of safety for the Jewish people that we had hoped. So it's very, very, very difficult. It's very difficult at the moment. And I think sounds obvious. I don't know what the future holds. Like, I really don't. You go, okay, I think it's dark days. But we just do what's right, which I think in this instance, wherever we are, is protect Jewish people. push back the forces of darkness in our own culture. I think we need deep cultural renewal. The church needs renewal. My message to the Jewish and Christian communities, if they'll listen, is the only way to make sure that anti-Semitism is unthinkable in a country is to reclaim and go back to our Judeo-Christian origins and roots and embed these in the foundation of our society. And we've moved from that, and we can see the tragic results. So, but that's that's a 40, 50-year program, and I don't know if it'll work. So I don't know. So my final answer is, man, you just go down swinging. Like you just go down swinging. You go, I'm not, if it's on my watch, I'll do whatever I can to not let evil triumph. I don't know who else is on this call. I'm a passionate Zionist. I think we need to make it easy for the Western world and whoever will listen to support the state of Israel politically and militarily, while holding it accountable as democracy and all the rest of it. But you go down swinging for good. I just go, that's it. That's all I've got. And it might cost us our lives and it might not work. But at the end of the day, I don't want anyone to be able to say to me, Mark, where were you when they came for your cousins in Bellevue Hill and you just sat in your church and did nothing? I don't want, and I'm just like, we can't let that happen again. And so that's my answer. And I'm sorry it's not more profound and theological, and I'm sure it's deeply unsatisfying in many ways, but it's all I got for you tonight.
It's great, Mark. Wonderful. And we thank you. Thank you, Stan. We look forward to talking with you more. And I just go, okay, I'm going down swinging. I'm just going down swinging. We're all in. So for all of you, I just want to give you a great big thank you, a very big well done, everybody. Stand with us, pray with us, stand with our cousins, testify to your neighbour, tell them the story of what is happening. And even if you get hit back, which I'm sure I'm not the only example, but there's many of you that will, within family members, you'll get some kickback, and you've just got to tell the story, take them back to history, go back into the stories and ask them to examine all of the history and story. Get on to Hugh Kitson's It's Your Land. We've got to educate these people, our friends, our families, our parliament members, of which we're working hard with at the moment with the rabbi, to educate them of what is really going on. So in conclusion tonight, we're a few minutes overdue. I like to keep on time, but please unmute and just give everybody a really hand of applause as to their contribution, all of you. Thank you so much, and good night for tonight.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. God bless.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Good night.